American citizens have had the constitutional right to bear arms, and I believe this legislation is common sense solution to preserve that right. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the rule today and to support final passage of H.R. 822. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. It's sad that we're taking time that should be spent on the economy and making communities safer and stronger to facilitate instead less rational and less effective gun safety laws. I deeply appreciate Ms. Slaughter putting the New York Times article from last Sunday in the record. The gentleman from Florida talks about his experience. Well, in that article is sad evidence. For example, in the state of Washington, where that tragic occurrence occurred, since 1995, more than 3,300 felons and people convicted of domestic violence misdemeanors have regained gun rights. And according to the analysis provided by the state and the court system, of those, more than 400, about 13%, have subsequently committed new crimes, and more than 200 committed felonies, including murder, assault in the first and second degree, child rape, and drive-by shooting. The gentleman talks about evidence. Well, a study in the American Public Health Journal referenced in that article found that denying handgun purchases to felons cut the risk of their committing new gun or violent crimes by 20 to 30%. And another study by the Journal of the American Medical Association found that handgun purchasers with at least one prior misdemeanor, not a felony, a misdemeanor, were more than 7 times as likely as those with no criminal record to be charged with new offenses. I come from a state that would have its protections undermined by this proposal. Now, I think the fact that we require character references, that people have to be 21 years of age, that we prohibit concealed weapon carrying by dangerous criminals, those have convicted with a misdemeanor such as assault, harassment, driving while intoxicated, I think those are reasonable. That's the minimum in Oregon. And instead, the enactment of this legislation will enable a race to the bottom, where the lowest common denominator will determine gun law, safety laws in Oregon. I think that's wrong. I urge a rejection of the rule and the bill.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Florida.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts. Bless you.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, a member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Scott.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, this bill undermines public safety, and that's why law enforcement organizations oppose the bill. It said that there's no national law established by this legislation. That's right, because if there was a national law, there'd be national standards. This is actually worse. The law, in effect, will actually be the law with of the state of the weakest concealed weapons permits. That will essentially become the law of the land because you could use that permit in any state. This bill allows people who are ineligible to get a concealed weapons permit in their home state to go to another jurisdiction and get a concealed weapons permit and use that concealed weapons permit anywhere in the country except their home state. Now, states have different minimum standards for concealed weapons, such as some require minimum training so that you know what you're dealing with. Others deny permits to certain sex offenders or domestic violence offenders. All of those minimum standards will be overridden by this bill, because permits from other states will have to be recognized. Basic controversy, Madam Chair, presented by this bill is the question of what happens if more people carry firearms. Some people believe that if more people carry firearms, the crime rate will go down. The studies that I've seen conclude that if more people are carrying firearms, it is more likely that somebody in their home or an innocent neighbor will be killed. That's more likely than the firearm being successfully used to thwart a crime. We should not undermine public safety. We should allow states to set their own concealed weapons standards and defeat this rule, and if the rule passes, defeat the bill. I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida wish to continue reserving.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman continues to reserve. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. McCarthy.
Gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman, and I thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in opposition for the rule of H.R. 822. As you know, this committee voted down a motion to consider the bill through the open rule. This is such an important issue that we really need to have the entire nation hear about it and have all of us have our voices heard. I want to make sure that I get to speak on an amendment of mine that is going to be considered. Under my amendment, states would be required to proactively opt in to the agreements called for by H.R. 822. This would restore the critical decision of who would be able to carry a concealed handgun in our communities back to where it belongs, to the local governments that have to deal with the policing and other consequences, such as this provision will do. We also hear about other amendments that would restore rights back to states and safety back to our communities and some sanity back into this debate. Madam Speaker, I think it's extremely important that we look at this as a state rights issue. My state, we have concealed weapon laws. We allow people to have concealed weapons. But there are other states that do not come up to our standard, and we don't want them coming into our state and telling us what to do. I suggest that we really look at this very carefully, and hopefully my colleagues will definitely vote for my amendment tomorrow when it comes up. We can deal with this. The Supreme Court has said people have the right to own a gun. They also said localities have the right to make the laws safe for their constituents. I happen to believe that H.R. 822 and the way this rule is written is not good for the United States of America. It's not good for the people of America, and I know it's not good for my state of New York. With that, I yield back the balance.
Gentlewoman's time's expired. Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Johnson.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker and members of the House. I rise today in support of the underlying bill and the rule. This is a critical issue with respect to Americans' basic rights. Courts have held over almost a century and a half that the right to bear arms is simply more than the Second and the 14th Amendment. Decided in the case of Beard versus U.S. in 1895 that citizens were entitled to repel force by force and entitled to stand their ground and meet any attack made on them by a deadly weapon. They then ruled 3 years ago in the D.C. versus Heller case, where they essentially declared self-defense as an inherent right central to the Second Amendment. And then in a case emanating from my state of Illinois, in the case of McDonald versus City of Chicago, further elaborated and extended that constitutional protection. So the underlying bill and our ability, American citizens' right, and the ability to carry firearms from state to state and to have that essential right built in, I think, is critical. I realize in reluctant support, however, of the rule and the bill only from this standpoint, and that's the reason for, in part, for my time here today, which I thank the gentleman for and I thank the members of this chamber for. Illinois is unique in that we have no carry concealed weapon law. We have no ability on the part of Illinois citizens to defend themselves. We have no right or ability on the part of Illinois citizens to exercise their Second and 14th Amendment rights. This bill, as it now reads, would extend the right only to other states, and I'm supportive of that because I think it's critical that we extend that right. But I am committed, as well as a number of my Illinois colleagues, and I think Second Amendment and fundamental rights congressmen throughout the United States, to restore that right and to bring that right to Illinois citizens. Time after time after time, as I visit the coffee houses, as I meet with individuals throughout the district, as I meet with people throughout the state, we are essentially denied in Illinois the rights and privileges of every other citizen of every other state in the Union except Illinois. That's a glaring deficiency, it's an omission, and I believe, frankly, it strikes at the core of our constitutional guarantees. I am going to continue the fight not only on this bill, but on standalone legislation down the line and through the process to bring to Illinois the same rights, keep and bear arms, Second, 14th Amendment rights that other citizens have throughout the country. It's extraordinarily important. It reaches at the essence of our Constitution, the essence of our guarantees as participants in a republic of civil liberties. And I believe that it is critical that we continue the fight now, together with my colleagues, Congressman Holtgren and others from Illinois who have joined me in this process. I appreciate the time. I support the bill. I support the rule. But I also support, and I want to conclude by saying this, Illinois citizens' right to keep and bear arms that are being flagrantly denied by our Illinois legislature. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, a member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Johnson.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to this rule and the bill, the National Right to Carry Reciprocity Act. It's the epitome of federal arrogance that would impose its will on the 50 state legislatures in this country. This bill tramples on our system of federalism and endangers the public safety by forcing states to allow the carrying of concealed firearms by out-of-state residents, even if they have not met basic licensing or training requirements mandated for carrying in that state. This total respect or disregard for state laws may come as a shock to Americans who have always been told that these Tea Party Republicans want to shrink the scope of the federal government. But instead of creating jobs, we're here considering strongly a bill that is opposed by law enforcement officials throughout the states and throughout the country. This bill is nothing more than a piece of special interest legislation for the National Rifle Association. Under this bill, states will no longer be able to set standards for who may carry concealed loaded guns in public. States that present those convicted of violent crime from carrying a concealed weapon would no longer be able to enforce their state laws. The Second Amendment protects the right to bear arms, but it is not, ladies and gentlemen, absolute. I urge my colleagues to oppose this rule and the underlying bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo.
Gentleman from Kansas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I applaud the House for taking up H.R. 822, the National Right to Carry Reciprocity Act. As a veteran and a strong defender of the Second Amendment, I encourage all of my colleagues to support me in this important piece of legislation. In Kansas in 2007, we began to issue concealed carry permits. Since then, Kansas has entered into agreements with many other states across the region to create interstate reciprocity. And while many states have similar agreements, they benefit only a portion of the American population. In Kansas, those states that have this basic fundamental right to keep and bear arms. The legislation and the rule we're considering today offer an opportunity for the federal government to facilitate cohesion between the states without extending its reach further into our laws than is necessary. The National Right to Carry Reciprocity Act would allow concealed carry permits in one state to be legally recognized in another and accepted in every other state in the Union that has a similar set of laws. Under the bill, everyone is still required to follow the firearm laws in each of the different states in which they choose to carry. Our Founding Fathers considered this right to bear arms so important they put it in the Constitution. Allowing this reciprocity is a simple act of extending what our founders originally intended. I hope that Congress will honor this principle by supporting this rule and passing this bill, which at its core does nothing more than protect the Second Amendment right of every Kansan and every law-abiding citizen. With that, I yield back the balance of my time, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, may I inquire from my friend how many more speakers he has left?
I have one more speaker.
Then a closing speaker, or do you have an... No.
No, he just one more speaker.
Okay, then I'll reserve my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves his time. Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my friend on the Rules Committee for yielding. I rise in strong support of this rule today. Now, I hear a lot of conversation about states' rights here on the House floor. Federalism, you know, what that debate that James Madison and Thomas Jefferson had more than 2 centuries ago, and it's an important debate to have. And I hope we have that debate on every single thing that we do in this body. I hope we ask ourselves that question every single day. Is this a responsibility and a role the federal government ought to be playing, or should this be something that's left to the states? Sadly, I've heard more of that enthusiasm today than I usually hear down here, but I welcome it, not as a step in the wrong direction, but a step towards that new beginning. I believe that we can absolutely come together around those kinds of uniting issues. Does the federal government need to be involved in this, or does it not? The reason I'm in strong support of this rule, however, is that it made 10 amendments in order. You know, this bill, this concealed carry reciprocity bill, and in fairness, full disclosure, I'm literally a card-carrying member of the concealed carry bandwagon. I've got my Georgia carry permit here in my pocket. I have since I was 22 and living in a neighborhood that I thought I needed some self-protection living in. This is a discussion that this body has been trying to have for about 15 years. As long as I can remember watching Congress, this bill has been knocking around in Congress, and no one has ever brought it to the floor of the House, despite a broad bipartisan majority of the body co-sponsoring it. I've always wondered why. Because for Pete's sakes, if it's something that the majority of the body is going to co-sponsor, then it ought to be something the majority of the body is going to support, and we ought to bring it to the House floor and let the House work its will. I'm still struggling with the underlying legislation, but I appreciate this leadership and this Rules Committee for bringing a bill to the floor when more than a majority of the House has co-sponsored, and I appreciate this leadership and this Rules Committee for giving us 10 amendments from which to choose to improve the bill. There are opt-in provisions if you're worried about federalism. There are honor state compact amendments if you're worried about federalism. There are study amendments with the GAO to sort out whether or not there are unintended consequences with regard to non-citizen, non-resident permits. These choices are out there for us. Not only did this Rules Committee bring forward a bill that other Congresses have not had the courage to bring forward, but it brought forward in a way that this body can work its will. 8 Democratic amendments, as I recall, 2 Republican amendments. That's the kind of House I came to Congress as a freshman to work in. I appreciate the work the Rules Committee did to make this possible, and I appreciate, Madam Speaker, the work of the leadership in guiding us down this path. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record an article from the New York Times entitled "So Much for Small Government." I'd like to ask unanimous consent to also insert an article in the record, an article by Frank Bruni entitled "Have Glock Will Travel," and I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter to the leadership of this House signed by Martha Coakley, the Attorney General of Massachusetts, opposing this legislation.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, we just heard from the gentleman from Georgia that we should somehow be grateful that the Rules Committee majority threw some crumbs our way. But the fact is, this is not an open rule. This is not an open process. And for a majority that came in saying that everything was going to be open, they have not kept their promise, and this is far from it. A lot of good amendments were not made in order. Members don't have the right to offer amendments here on the floor. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, out of fairness, to keep, especially my Republican friends, in keeping with your promise when you took the majority, please vote no on this rule. And I would also say, Madam Speaker, that I oppose this bill because it tramples on the rights of my state, and it tramples on the rights of a number of states that have reasonable guidelines for who can carry a concealed weapon, and under this bill, those guidelines all go away. So the lowest common denominator carries the day. I don't think that's good for public safety. And if you care about states' rights, you know, it's not good for states' rights advocates either. But I want to just spend my final moments just reminding my colleagues that we have an economic crisis before us. There are 14 million Americans without jobs. There are millions more who are underemployed. We just came back from another congressional break. I don't know where you went on your congressional break, but if you went back to your districts, I find it hard to believe that the most pressing issue that faces your constituency is trying to figure out a way to make it easier to carry concealed weapons from state to state to state. I just don't believe that that's what people are talking about. Certainly not people in my congressional district. My people are talking about jobs. When I'm at the airport, people talk to me about jobs. That's what they want us to focus on, not on reaffirming the national motto of the United States is in God we trust. I mean, we wasted a day on that. Didn't need reaffirming. There it is, right up there in gold lettering above where the Speaker sits. It's on the back of a dollar bill. Why do we have to spend time debating that? And today, we're not talking about jobs. We're talking about a gun bill? Now, I know that the special interest lobbyists of the National Rifle Association, they like this, and they want us to move forward on this. But put the special interest aside for a second and put your constituents first. And what do our constituents want us to do? They want us to fix this economy. We should be debating some of the components of the President's jobs bill, or a jobs bill of your own, but we should be talking about how to put people back to work, not spending time here talking about how to make it easier to carry a concealed weapon from state to state to state. I mean, this is nuts that we're spending and wasting this time on this issue. Madam Speaker, let me give you, the gentleman from Georgia said a majority of members favor this bill, therefore we should bring it to the floor. Well, you know what? A majority of members of this chamber also support a bill to hold China accountable for the fact that China manipulates its currency. And as a result of that, if we actually held them accountable, we could actually create an estimated 1 million to 1.5 million jobs in America. A majority of members of this House on both sides of the aisle support that. Yet we can't get that to the floor. That will help create some jobs. I mean, there's bipartisan support for that. There's bipartisan support for the components of the President's jobs bill. Yet you will not bring it to the floor. Instead, we're dealing with this stuff. Again, this may be good for pleasing a special interest, but it is not what we should be doing in this chamber. What's good for this country is a focus on the economy. What's good for this country is a focus on jobs. And I always say to my Republican friends, your indifference on the issue of jobs is shameful. It is absolutely shameful. I mean, millions of Americans out of work, millions underemployed, people worried about where they could pay their mortgages, pay their heating bills, pay their prescription drug bills, where they can afford to send their kids to college. And this is what we're spending our time on? Give me a break. We need to refocus in this Congress. We need to get our priorities straight. I'm going to tell you, what is at the top of the list is not reaffirming the motto of this country, is not abortion bills or gun bills. What's at the top of the list is jobs. Let's put America back to work. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this restrictive rule and vote no on the underlining bill, and let's bring a jobs bill to this floor. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I'm always amazed at what goes on in these chambers. We hear from the other side of the aisle about talking about jobs, even though this House has passed 20, count them, jobs bills. If you don't believe it, read it. You know, we talk about issues about in God we trust. I think it is something that we should affirm here in America about our belief in God. I believe that the Second Amendment is not a special interest group. I believe the Second Amendment needs to be protected at all costs. You know, you've heard some in this House that would take away our right to even carry or possess a firearm. Madam Speaker, you know, in 40 years in law enforcement, it wasn't just guns that killed people. It was every object imaginable, from fists to feet to pipes to kitchen knives. Madam Speaker, and baseball bats. Madam Speaker, this is about the ability for those that have a legitimate carry permit to go across the state line and not be subject to arrest. Someone who makes an honest mistake by going across the state line that doesn't have a reciprocity agreement with their current state and they have a carry permit. Madam Speaker, this is more about what's right with America in regards to upholding our Second Amendment, our constitutional right. And so those that are in favor of doing away with all types of guns, I guess, it smacks that they disagree with our Founding Fathers and our Second Amendment right. Madam Speaker, I support this rule and encourage my colleagues to support it as well. H.R. 822 protects the rights of legal gun owners throughout the United States. I've heard this debate this afternoon about the dangers of gun crime. I completely agree. Guns are dangerous tools that need to be treated with respect. Guns can be used by people to kill other people. However, what I saw in those 40 years as a cop is we need to talk about these in broader terms. What we really need to do is talk about the difference between legal and illegal guns. Most people who used a gun to kill a human being are not just using a gun they obtained legally, that they are licensed legally, that they got legal concealed carry permit for. You know, when you look at the numbers of CCW permit holders that have actually violated the law, at least in the state of Florida, it's 0.001%. Those people, there are people that are criminals, and they're criminals simply for having a firearm. Even in the state of Florida, a felon can't possess a firearm. Discussion what to do about these folks and how to keep them from illegally possessing a firearm is another debate at another time. Today we're talking about one thing. We're talking about legal gun owners to legally travel from one state to another that have a concealed weapons permit. I support that effort, and that's why I'm a proud sponsor, co-sponsor, stand here today of H.R. 822, and as a sponsor of this rule, H.Res. 463. I encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this strongly, I underline strongly, bipartisan legislation. With that, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to, and without objection,
Speaker,
a motion.
On that, I request a recorded vote. The yeas and nays.
Does the gentleman request the yeas and nays? The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on the question will be postponed. Oh, Loby.
The gentleman from New Jersey rise.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that during further consideration of H.R. 2838 in the Committee of the Whole, pursuant to the House Resolution 455, the amendment by Mr. Young of Alaska, now at the desk, be considered as though printed as the last amendment printed in the House Report 112-267 and be debatable for 10 minutes.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Young of Alaska. Page 56, after line 3, insert the following and conform the table of contents accordingly. Section 612, conveyance of decommissioned Coast Guard cutter Storis. A. In general, the commandment of the Coast Guard shall convey without consideration all right, title, and interest of the United States in and to the decommissioned Coast Guard cutter Storis, in this section referred to as the vessel, to the Storis Museum, a nonprofit entity of Juneau, Alaska, if the Storis Museum agrees. 1. To use the vessel as a historic memorial, make the vessel available to the public as a museum, and work cooperatively with other museums to provide education on and memorialize the maritime heritage of the vessel and other maritime activities in Alaska, the Pacific Northwest, the Arctic Ocean, and adjacent oceans and seas. 2. Not to use the vessel for commercial transportation purposes. 3. To make the vessel available to the United States government if needed for use by the commandant in time of war or a national emergency or based on the critical needs of the Coast Guard. 4. To hold the government harmless for any claims arising from exposure to hazardous materials, including asbestos and polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, except for claims arising for the use of the vessel by the government. 5. To bear all costs of transportation and delivery of the vessel. 6. To bear all costs of vessel disposal in accordance with federal law when the vessel is no longer used as a museum. And 7. To any other conditions the commandant considers appropriate. B. Maintenance and delivery of vessel. Before conveyance of the vessel under this section, the commandant shall make, to the extent practical and subject to other Coast Guard mission requirements.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading of the amendment.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. Your objection? Without objection, that will be the order. The gentleman from New Jersey rise.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and expand their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 2838.
So ordered. The House Resolution 455 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House and the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2838. Will the gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Emerson, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2838, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to authorize appropriations for the Coast Guard for fiscal years 2012 through 2015 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the order of the House of today, an additional amendment has been made in order. When the Committee of the Whole rose on Friday, November 4th, 2011, Amendment Number 8, printed in House Report 112-267, offered by the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Slaughter, had been disposed of. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 13, printed in House Report 112-267. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Madam Chairwoman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 13, printed in House Report number 112-267, offered by Mr. Landry of Louisiana.
Pursuant to House Resolution 455, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Landry, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My amendment is simple. It says that if another country is fine with having an offshore supply vessel carry a certain cargo in that country's water, then the Coast Guard cannot object to it. I bring this amendment because a company in my district is trying to get a vessel certified to operate in Mexico, trying to preserve American jobs. Mexico has okayed the vessel and the American ABS says it has no objection. The only holdup is the Coast Guard. As a result, the company in my district currently has the vessel sitting at the dock and workers sitting at home and capital tied up fighting the regulation. Again, my amendment is simple. It allows an offshore supply vessel to carry as much oil as it does drilling fluids when that vessel is operating outside of U.S. waters, if that vessel is in compliance with the international safety standards for that class vessel. This is a common sense change. Drilling fluids have the same flashpoint as oil. As such, unequal risk. Thus, there should be a uniform standard for how much of that type of cargo the vessel can carry outside of U.S. waters. Unfortunately, I don't believe that Congress needs to act on this matter. I believe that the Coast Guard can easily make the necessary changes by simply adopting common sense language and listening to the host country. For this reason, I would offer to withdraw my amendment if the chairman will promise to help me work with the Coast Guard to get this common sense approach made and American workers back at work. I yield to the chairman.
Thank the gentleman from coastal Louisiana. As we discussed previously, we'll be very happy to work with the gentleman to see if we can't figure out a way to do this, and I thank him for his cooperative efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to withdraw my amendment.
Is there objection? Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. It is now in order to consider amendment number 15, printed in House Report 112-267. For what purpose does the gentleman from Puerto Rico seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 15, printed in House Report number 112-267, offered by Mr. Pierluisi of Puerto Rico.
Pursuant to House Resolution 455, the gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Pierluisi, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand the other side of the aisle needs a colloquy, so I yield 1 minute to Mr. Mica.
Thank the gentleman for yielding, and I'd like to yield to gentleman from Texas for the purpose of entering into a colloquy.
I thank Chairman Mica, and I rise to enter into a colloquy with him. Chairman Mica, H.R. 2838 requires standby vessels near oil rigs. Subsequent to Deepwater Horizon, 5 major reports have made numerous recommendations for improvements in oil spill prevention and response. Do you agree it would be preferable to review these recommendations and then make comprehensive decisions on prevention and response improvements rather than act on a single, limited, expensive response strategy, standby vessels?
I agree with the gentleman.
Will the chairman work with me as the process moves forward to look for oil spill prevention and response strategies that are more effective and less expensive than standby vessels?
Understand the gentleman's concern. We'll work with him and yield back the balance of our time.
Gentleman yields back. Where are we now? Gentleman from Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My amendment will make a narrow and carefully targeted modification to the Passenger Vessel Services Act of 1886 as it applies to Puerto Rico. This amendment would authorize foreign flag vessels, in particular large yachts and recreational vessels, to transport tourists and other paying passengers between ports within Puerto Rico. My amendment would remove an outdated obstacle that makes it impossible for the United States to compete with foreign jurisdictions in the Caribbean region when it comes to attracting investment in nautical tourism. Puerto Rico has the highest unemployment rate in the U.S., and increased nautical tourism has the potential to create new American jobs and spur economic growth. Current federal law already allows foreign flag vessels to transport tourists and other paying customers from a port in Puerto Rico to any port in the Caribbean region outside of Puerto Rico, including to ports in the neighboring U.S. Virgin Islands where the Act does not apply at all. Yet, contrary to common sense, these very same vessels cannot be used to transport tourists or other paying passengers between Puerto Rico's own ports. So, for example, individuals and businesses cannot charter larger foreign flag yachts or recreational vessels for tourists or other customers who would like to sail between Puerto Rico's various marinas. My amendment would allow this to happen. Madam Chair, the status quo simply defies common sense. Puerto Rico consists of multiple islands and is home to 3.7 million American citizens. It has over 700 miles of coastline and over 150 beaches. It is located in the heart of the Caribbean Sea, often recognized as the yachting capital of the world. It is surrounded by island nations like the Dominican Republic, Aruba, and the British Virgin Islands, all of which have established thriving nautical tourism industries. Yet, the United States in general, and Puerto Rico in particular, have been unable to participate in this growing market. According to the U.S. Coast Guard, there are a mere 30 or so recreational vessels now operating in the Caribbean that, under current law, are authorized to transport tourists and other paying customers between Puerto Rico ports. Nothing could better illustrate how the U.S. jurisdiction of Puerto Rico is being disadvantaged by present law. As noted, the purpose of my amendment is simple and straightforward. Puerto Rico faces many economic challenges. The territory's current unemployment rate exceeds 15%. While the increased nautical tourism that my amendment would allow will not alone solve these problems, it does have the potential to make a meaningful difference for the communities and constituencies I represent. I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will support this narrow amendment, which simply enables the United States to compete with foreign jurisdictions in the Caribbean's growing nautical tourism market. Thank you, Madam Chair. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Does anyone rise in opposition? Gentleman from Washington? Does the gentleman from Washington seek time in opposition?
I seek time in opposition.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I reluctantly rise to object to the amendment offered by the gentleman from Puerto Rico, which would undermine the Jones Act. The amendment would allow foreign-flagged, foreign-built, foreign-owned, and foreign-manned vessels over 100 gross tons to carry passengers within Puerto Rico. As such, this waiver would disadvantage U.S. maritime operators and U.S. seafarers who might otherwise provide such services, and in its present form, we cannot support the amendment. I commend the gentleman from Puerto Rico for his sincere efforts to expand maritime commerce in Puerto Rico, but I cannot support the amendment he's offered today. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Puerto Rico. Gentleman has 1 minute remaining.
Yes,
Does the gentleman wish to reserve or?
How many other?
The opposition does have the right to close. Gentleman has 1 minute. Gentleman from Washington, 4.5 minutes remaining.
Okay, I'll be brief, Madam Chair. Thank you for the time. I hear that there's some opposition, but what frustrates me is that there's no specifics. I haven't yet heard a specific way in which my proposed amendment would harm any U.S. flag vessel or industry. Indeed, the groups that are supposedly opposing have not been able to articulate any specific amendment that I could make to my bill to take care of their concerns. Rather, their concerns appear to be more of a generalized and vague quality, namely that they are concerned that allowing any modification or revision to the Passenger Vessel Services Act will lead eventually to other requests for modifications down the line. But I believe we have to be balanced. Puerto Rico is economically going through a recession now for 5 years in a row, and this could make a difference, and helping Puerto Rico helps the U.S. We are talking, after all, about an American territory, about American jobs, and the nautical industry in nautical tourism industry in Puerto Rico and the U.S. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no further speakers or comments, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Puerto Rico. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment, gentleman from Washington.
On that, request the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Puerto Rico will be postponed. Pursuant to the order of the House today, it is now in order to consider the amendment by Mr. Young of Alaska, now at the desk. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alaska seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Young of Alaska.
Pursuant to House Resolution 455, in the order of the House today, the gentleman from Alaska, Mr. Young, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alaska.
Madam Chairman, this is well explained in unanimous assent by Mr. Lobiondo, and I just urge the passage of the conveyance of the decommissioned Coast Guard cutter Storis to a nonprofit organization in Juneau, Alaska for use as a historical memorial, and reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Who seeks time in opposition? Gentleman from Washington.
I claim the time in opposition, but I do not oppose the amendment.
Without objection, gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I just encourage my colleagues to support the Young amendment, and I yield back the balance.
Gentleman yields back.
And I yield back to.
Gentleman from Alaska yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Alaska. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of Chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, the unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 15, printed in House Report 112-267 by the gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Pierluisi, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 15, printed in House Report number 112-267, offered by Mr. Pierluisi of Puerto Rico.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
The House this afternoon resumed consideration of the Coast Guard reauthorization bill, the Programs and Policies bill. They are voting now on an amendment proposed by Delegate Pedro Pierluisi of Puerto Rico, which deals with passenger vehicles weighing more than 100 tons operating in Puerto Rico. 15-minute vote, and the House this afternoon is likely to finish up work on the Coast Guard bill. They also began debate on a bill that they'll finish up tomorrow, a bill that would allow gun owners with proper permits to carry firearms across state lines, the concealed carry bill. More on that bill ahead, and more debate in the House as well. Off the floor of the House today, with the deadline looming on the Super Committee, the Joint Deficit Reduction Committee, Speaker Boehner and Senate Majority Leader Reid have met. The Hill newspaper writes this afternoon that they met as a sign that they may take a larger role in deficit talks, according to congressional aides. The Hill writing that a leadership aide said Reid and Boehner discussed a range of topics in Speaker Boehner's office, but declined to provide any details of that meeting. They say that some congressional sources interpreted the meeting as a sign that the deficit reduction talks of the Super Committee are moving to the leadership level. That from The Hill at thehill.com. The Senate is in this afternoon as well, or will be back in at 2:15 Eastern to continue deliberation on another so-called minibus, the spending for 2012. This portion of that spending is just under $130 billion, and this one includes spending for energy and water projects, for financial services, and for State Department and foreign operations. But here on the House floor, the first recorded vote of the day, an amendment to the Coast Guard bill. This is the last amendment vote on the Coast Guard reauthorization bill, an amendment proposed by Delegate Pierre Luisi of Puerto Rico. Following this, we expect the debate on the Democratic motion to recommit and final passage after that. They will also vote on the rule to a bill that would allow permitted gun owners to carry those firearms across state lines. They're going to vote on the rule for that, but the general debate on that bill will not happen until tomorrow. The rule would allow for an hour of general debate and consideration of 10 amendments. But this 15-minute vote winding down, motion to recommit vote coming up, and that also will be a 15-minute vote we expect. The Senate is going to gavel back in about 10 minutes or so, and they're going to pick up debate on 2012 spending, another so-called minibus bill packaging 3 different agencies together, several actually, energy and water, financial services, and State Department and Foreign Operations. The Senate back in at 2:15 on C-SPAN 2. Also this afternoon, we were hoping to bring you coverage of a news conference with Democratic leader, Democratic whip Steny Hoyer about the progress on the deficit committee. He and actually other Republicans and Democrats as well. But we understand that news conference has been pushed back a day. It was to be this afternoon at 2:30. It's been pushed back until tomorrow, we understand, at 10:30 Eastern with Steny Hoyer, Heath Shuler, Republican Mike Simpson, and also Senator Saxby Chambliss. That has been pushed back until Thursday. On the issue of the super committee, the Joint Deficit Reduction Committee, Speaker Boehner and Harry Reid met today, and the Politico writes that the talks have long been, these are the talks on the $1.2 trillion deficit deal. The deadline for that is next Thursday. Politico writes the talks have long been between the 2 leaders' chiefs of staff and top aides, but that Boehner and Reid are meeting shows that serious negotiations have begun about the supercommittee's endgame, with a November 23rd deadline looming. Politico writes the meeting came the same day that House Republicans got their most detailed rundown on the plans under consideration by the 12-person panel. The conference today getting a briefing from the member on the committee, Jeb Hensarling.
yeas are 322. The nays are 100. The amendment is adopted. The question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Accordingly, under the rule, the committee rises.